Hello and welcome to the second lecture of the Inclusive Education course. This lecture is going to be on the importance of attitudes and beliefs. In the last lecture, we looked at inclusive philosophy. The main things that I really wanted you to get from that was what is inclusive education, the importance of how inclusion is actually a tool and a function within democracy, and that it's a part of our democratic system. It's a way to bring about justice for people who are disadvantaged, and to bring down barriers for people that have barriers. The other main thing was about how inclusion is a human right, and we also talked about the ideas around inclusion, like the idea of the least restrictive environment, and the idea that of normalisation, and the idea that inclusion, that when we're talking about students with disabilities, it's important to understand that the problem is not located in the child, but it's often located in the environment and in the things that stop them in the environment. So those were the kind of key ideas around inclusion. Today we're talking about beliefs and attitudes. Beliefs and attitudes are super important because when it comes to making inclusion happen and physically doing inclusion, it is the single most important thing for inclusion being successful. If you have an attitude that is against inclusion, it's going to be really hard to teach students with disabilities, students from different ethnicities, students that have different languages in your classroom. Okay? So what research has said about this is that there are three things that are really important to doing inclusion. First, you need the skills to be able to include people well. So that's working on those personal skills, that's administrative skills, and those are things that you just learn as you keep on going as a teacher. The second thing is knowledge, which is about knowing what the disability is, understanding a person's ethnicity or a person's background, understanding the challenges that children from low socioeconomic backgrounds face, or understanding the challenges of a child that's in a single family home, single parent family home. So knowledge is important. But the most important thing is attitude. A positive attitude to inclusion is crucial to implementing inclusion, and it's actually more important than how much you know and how good your skills are. If you've got a good attitude, then you're halfway there. But the problem is that the majority of teachers actually currently hold neutral or negative attitudes towards inclusion. And some of the reasons for this is that they do not have knowledge or understanding of people's disabilities, or they don't have the resources to make inclusion happen, or it's just stressful, it's just hard. And a lot of teachers have given up on the idea of inclusion because trying to teach an entire class that also has students with disabilities in it can be really challenging. So to try to display that, in Australia, positive attitudes towards inclusion tends to decline as people get more experience. So this study done by Boyle, Topping and Jindal Snape looked at the amount of positive attitudes that people had when they first came out of university towards after they'd been in school for a few years. And it showed that people who were new teachers had really high levels of inclusion. But after just 1 year, the levels of inclusion, of inclusive beliefs and attitudes that supported inclusion dropped drastically. And there was a bit of a trend throughout a teacher's career to actually lose their inclusive belief as they go. And the reason for that is that teaching is stressful. There's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of face-to-face contact with difficult people, difficult parents. Often there was another study done to talk about the resourcing in Australian schools. Often we don't have the resources that we need to do inclusion. There are lots of schools in Australia, in private schools, that don't even have a special needs teacher in the school doing support for students with disabilities. There are a lot of classes that don't have support from a teacher's aide. There are a lot of classes that are overcrowded, where there's too many students in them. And what happens is that sadly, people come in with great beliefs and great attitudes, but it's really hard to hold on to those attitudes when you're really stressed. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is how can you hold on to this philosophy of inclusion and this belief that every student can succeed, this belief that every student is valuable and that every student can learn. How do you hold on to that belief when things are so hard in the classroom? So that's what this lecture is going to be about. There has been some research into this as to what is known to improve a teacher's attitude towards inclusion. Firstly, we found that if you get training in inclusive education and you do more education in that, it actually improves your attitude because it just gives you more skills and knowledge. And that gives you more confidence to go into a classroom and do things well. There's been research that has shown that people who have done a degree in special needs education, who then work in a mainstream class, tend to have higher levels of inclusion just because they kind of know the best way to do it because of that they've had that extra training. A second thing that has been shown to improve people's belief has been exposure. If you have family members that have disabilities, chances are you've grown up really understanding disability. And that gives you a real advantage when you come into the classroom because you're going to know how to connect to people with disabilities because you have that experience. So, for example, for me, I have a mother who has a disability. So when I walk into a classroom, I walk in with the experience of living with someone with a disability, and that makes that doing inclusion easier personally for me because I've lived that experience. Another thing that's really important is resources. If you have special education teachers floating around classrooms and supporting you, that's going to make things so much easier. If you have special rooms put aside to support students and you have really well-designed classrooms, that makes a huge difference. If you have technology, students with autism, technology is a game changer. If you have smart boards and MacBooks and those sorts of things, that makes a big difference as to whether you will have a good attitude and you will go well. And then the last reason is internal motivation, if you believe in inclusion. So we do know some other things, and these are things that we kind of are still working out. We do know that a person's faith can make a difference. We know that if you have not had much exposure to people with disabilities, but you have a faith where you want to look after people, that can actually be a negative because some teachers that have really nice hearts actually go into the room and then kind of not patronise, but kind of do everything for the student. And there's an element to which you have to treat people with disabilities the same as every other student, and you actually have to empower them and not do things for them. So sometimes faith can make that a bit of a struggle. One of the other things is that people that have particular religious beliefs, like if you believe that everyone's made in the image of God, that's actually related to being more inclusive. So your faith can inspire you to do the right thing and can inspire you to want to include more people. One of the other things that's also really important is that there are different kinds of beliefs about what inclusion is. So it also depends on what your belief of inclusion is. So the first belief is the idea that inclusion is about location, that the goal is to get students from the special needs school into the mainstream school. It's about getting everyone learning in the same place so we can all learn from each other. That's one idea of what inclusion is. Another idea of inclusion is that inclusion is about the community, like we said in our last lecture, this idea that inclusion is about changing society. So inclusion can happen anywhere. It's not just the school, it's not just the special needs school. Inclusion is your local soccer team. Inclusion is your church community. Inclusive education is everything. Then other people kind of come to inclusion with this belief that inclusion is specific. Inclusion is about giving individuals the support that they need. Doesn't matter whether it's a mainstream school or a special school. It's about this child needs more support, and that's what my belief of inclusion is, that every single child gets what they need. And then the last idea of inclusion is this general idea where inclusion is more about we need to do what works for the whole classroom. So we need to teach in a way that benefits everyone. If we know that reading out of a textbook for every single lesson bores our students, then we need to change that. We need to put more videos in our lessons. We need to do more practical demonstrations. So we have to understand that there's a lot of different beliefs about what inclusion is, and chances are you probably already follow one or more of these beliefs in combination. For myself personally, I really identify with this general idea and this specific idea. I really identify with this idea that it's about the individual child and it's about changing instructions so that everyone benefits. I don't identify so much with the idea of location, and I think community is important, but that's not kind of that's not the one that registers highest in my way of thinking, and that's fine. And everyone will come to this with slightly different beliefs, slightly different emphasis, and different focus. So this is probably a good thing to talk about in the forums or when we have our intensive, to talk about what do you believe? What is your idea of what you think inclusion should be focused on? And to an extent, it should be all four of these. So to start with, we have to understand what the difference is between beliefs and attitudes, which can be a bit of a confusing space to get your head into. So a belief is basically what you think is true. Okay? It is your idea of reality, what the nature of the world is, what the nature of people are, what you think is true. An attitude, on the other hand, is how you feel or act towards someone. It's your disposition. It's the way that you demonstrate yourself in the classroom. So, for example, a teacher can have the belief that students are made in the image of God, and they just believe that that is the way that the world works, that's the way God made things, and that is your belief, that all students, all people are made to reflect God's love and God's compassion. And then that's a belief. The attitude based on that belief might be that I need to treat these people with respect in my classroom because they are made in God's image. Another attitude that might come from that is I need to put 110% into my class because they deserve it because they're made in God's image. Okay? So beliefs are what you think about the world, and the attitude is the kind of disposition that comes off of that. What's important is that we have beliefs that we might not be aware of. One of the words that we use for beliefs, I might type this up, is That's not happening for me today. That's all right. One of the words for beliefs is explicit. So explicit beliefs are the beliefs that you have time to think about. You think it through. You go home, you read up on it, and you think about what you're doing. And implicit beliefs are those beliefs that you don't have a time to think about. Your knee-jerk reactions. Sometimes you have beliefs that are implicit that you don't even know are there. And you might do something and it's like, oh, that's just demonstrated an implicit belief that I didn't realise I had. So if you go onto the online Moodle page, there's a section in the interactive activities where it actually has a racism belief test. And quite a lot of people do that test and realise that they have implicit beliefs that they didn't realise they had. So that's a really good one to check out. So some beliefs I'm going to talk about when we talk about inclusive education. We have some ideas about what inclusive beliefs are and what exclusive beliefs are. So one exclusive belief is the idea that disabilities are inherently negative and should be removed as much as possible. So some people come in with this belief that disabilities are bad and there's no benefits to them. An inclusive version of that belief is having a disability is not always negative. It can give individuals unique strengths, talents, or experiences that are valued. So if we work on our beliefs and we try to work on actually believing this or coming to terms with this idea, or even just working out if you agree with that idea, that can help you in the classroom, just to know what you believe and how you get there. Another exclusive belief is disability is a problem that is located in the child, which we touched on last time. And the inclusive version of that belief is that sometimes it is the environment that is disabling. Sometimes a child can't function, like a child with autism might not be able to function in a class that's loud and doing interactive things. Sometimes a child with autism might not be able to function in a room that's really bright. So it's not so much about the child's physical needs, it's about the way that the classroom is set up. Another belief is thinking of disabilities as social deficits. So one of the problems with exclusive thinking is this idea that, oh, this is wrong with you because you have autism. And the reality is that every child with a disability is different. Every child with autism is different. And a deficit might not be related to their disability. It might not be related to something that they can't do. Because what happens if we start thinking this is we start thinking in the mindset of, oh, they can't do that because they have autism. Or they can't do that because they have a learning disability. So an example of that is I had a student with a learning disability, had quite a low IQ, and she could not do the alphabet. She was in year 3, could still not do the alphabet. But the teacher's aide in that class thought, well, what's different ways that we can help her to learn to read? And they said, let's try singing. And they put words in front of her and started singing a song, and she could read words when it was being sung. And she was singing all these songs and learning all these songs and was actually learning how to read by singing. And so what we have to realise is that sometimes disabilities are a form of diversity. It means that the children will learn it, but in a different way. So we have to stop thinking in terms of they can't do this. We have to start thinking of they can do it in a different way. Or maybe they can't do it yet as a really good way of thinking. And then another belief example is education is about transmitting shared values that need to be handed down to each generation. This can be really problematic in inclusion because people in your classroom might have grown up with very different values to you. They might be Christian and they might follow the Bible, but they might have very different values. They might not be Christian. They might be from a different religion. And if we are coming from this view of I'm trying to impart values onto people, that might not work for a child with disabilities. An inclusive belief is education is about transmitting enduring understanding that students can use in their own context. So it's about how does this value work in your context? How does this value work in your culture? So an example of that might be sometimes students with autism really struggle to show empathy. And one of the things that teachers sometimes do as a mistake is to try to teach students how to show empathy, how to show the right facial expression, how to say the right words. They script it and things like that. But for some students, they can actually show empathy, they just don't show it in the ways that most students do. And sometimes it's about not how do I teach you to show empathy, how does this student show empathy is what we have to do. How does this student show love and kindness? How does this student find a way to worship God? How does this student find a way to follow the Bible? How does this student find a way to write? How does this student find a way to count? So that is kind of those believing. So I found it really handy because I've often found myself doing some of these ideas in the black area. And every now and then I just look at this visual and think, okay, am I moving over to these beliefs? In the attitude domain, this is an example of how beliefs might play out for a teacher. So you see an action. Let's say you see I could kick students out of class when they are being disruptive so everyone else can learn. So earlier I was talking about implicit beliefs and explicit beliefs. When you do things in the class, your actions are actually a clue to what you actually believe. Because you might have thought through, I think this, this and this, but then your actions often show something completely different. This has been my experience. So, if I'm in the classroom and I kick a student out of class when they are being disruptive, there are assumed values and beliefs behind that. I might think I'm having the value that having students with disabilities in my class, and to start with, I think I really value that. That's my explicit value. That's what I think is important. And because of that, I have the belief that students with disabilities will learn better in a mainstream class. Okay? So that's my value and that's my belief. But when I then do the action of kicking a student out of class, the belief I'm actually showing is that the real belief is the class will work better when the disruptive student either stops being disruptive or leaves the class. That's the belief that I'm actually showing. And my real value that I'm showing is I value the class operating smoothly so I can teach. That's the value that I'm really having. And it's not that these are necessarily bad beliefs or exclusive beliefs. I think to an extent maybe there's no such thing as a bad belief to an extent. But what it is that we actually need to understand what we really believe and what we really value. And we need to get to the bottom of what we really believe and what we really value. And then we need to challenge it. We need to say, is that a belief that I need to change? Is that a value that I've got wrong? And that is a personal journey that I think every teacher needs to go on. The research that I've read shows that teachers who have really worked out what they believe and what they value and what they think is important are far more likely to be inclusive because they're consistent with what they're doing. So I've got a video here that explains a theory about how beliefs work and how attitudes come about. So I'm hoping that this helps you understand what we're talking about.
Introducing Powtoon!
Okay, so I'm hoping that that's really helping you understand how beliefs, values, and attitudes all interact with each other. And I think it's really good to start thinking now about what are your beliefs, what are your values, and what are your attitudes. Do your attitudes line up with what you think you believe? Is a real challenge that I think we need to think about. No, I don't want to watch that again. Okay, so I'm going to go into a little bit more about attitudes here. Attitudes are how you feel or act towards someone, your disposition. Attitudes can be explicit, so we've talked about that, or it could be implicit. So it could be you have time to think about it or you don't have time to think about it. So we're going to watch this next video which talks about, I think this one talks about how attitudes are formed.
So what do you think of when you hear the word attitude? Do you think of the typical moody teenager who needs a reality check, or maybe someone who has a strong viewpoint about a certain topic? Well, an attitude is actually both of these, and a culmination of a lot more. So an attitude is a learned tendency. It's a learned tendency to evaluate things in a certain way. So to evaluate people, issues, events, objects. And we can break down attitude into 3 components. So in the first component, we have the affective component, and this is also known as the emotional component. So we may feel or have emotions about a certain object or subject or topic, and this is what's going to shape our attitude. So for example, I can show an emotional attitude by saying, I am scared of spiders. So the word scared indicates an emotion, and that's going to shape our attitude towards of spiders. The second component is called the behavioral component. And the behavioral component is how we act or behave towards an object or a subject. So in this component, we may say something like, I will avoid spiders and scream if I see one. So the words avoid and scream indicate an action or a behavior, and that's going to influence our attitude. And the last component is called the cognitive component. And in the cognitive component, we form thoughts, we form beliefs, or we have some sort of knowledge about a subject or an object or a topic that's going to influence and shape our attitude.
So I'm just going to pause it for a second there just to point something out. So far in this lecture, we've mostly been talking about the cognitive, and we've talked a little bit about the behavioural, but there's also a feeling part of it. One of the things that we have to understand is that sometimes people might actually just be afraid of teaching students with disabilities. Sometimes they look different. Sometimes it's about, I'm scared of how to interact with them. And that is where spending time with people with disabilities is so helpful, because that can really help you to have a more healthy emotion when it comes to helping people with disabilities. So if you look at these 3 things, these are 3 areas where you can think about how I can get a better attitude or how I can improve my attitude towards teaching students with disabilities. I can look at my beliefs and my knowledge. I can look at how I act and behave to see if that's consistent with my beliefs and knowledge. And I can look at how I feel and whether those feelings are healthy.
So an example here is saying, I believe spiders are dangerous. We have a belief that they are dangerous. and that's going to form our attitude. So we call these three components the A, B, C model of attitude. So let's take a look at two sentences I've written that utilize these three components of attitude. So right here in the first sentence, I write, I love yoga because I get to do meditation and I believe it helps me relax, so I will go to class each week. So in looking at this sentence, what do you think is the affective or emotional component? Right here, I love yoga. Love is a feeling, an emotion. What about the behavioral component? Exactly. If you said I will go to class each week, then you are right. Going to class is a behavior. It's an action. And that's going to form your attitude towards yoga. What about the last one, the cognitive component? I believe. That should indicate belief or cognition. I believe it will help me relax. That's a thought. That maybe you also have some prior knowledge that's going to help you shape that attitude. Alright, on to the next one. What about the second sentence? I am frightful of roller coasters and believe they are stupid, so I will be on the carousel at the park. What's the affective component here? Once again, I am frightful of roller coasters. First part of the sentence. Fright is an emotion. It's a fear. What about the behavioral component? B. The word be should help you see that it's a behavior. It's an action. I will be on the carousel at the park. Because you're afraid of roller coasters, you're not going to be on the roller coaster. You're going to be somewhere else. It's going to shape your attitude. And the last part. What about the cognitive part? Believe is the magic word. I believe they're stupid. I believe roller coasters are stupid. Maybe you have some knowledge. It's a belief. That is a cognitive component of attitude.
Okay, so that's going into probably a bit more depth than you need. But I'm hoping that that's helping you understand the idea between beliefs and attitudes. Another really important part of beliefs is that there's a difference between beliefs in and beliefs that. So there is a difference between believing in something and believing that something is true. So there's a difference between believing in inclusive education and believing that inclusive education is a good thing. So, for example, there's a verse in the Bible that talks about, I think it's in James, I might actually have that coming up later, I'm not sure, where it says, the demons even believe in God. So what does that believe in God? What does that mean? So you can believe that God exists, but that does not mean that you believe in God, that you have a trusting relationship with God that helps your everyday decisions. And that's the same with inclusion. You can believe that inclusion is a good thing, but believing in inclusion means that you're trusting inclusion is a good process and that your way of life is in some way impacted by inclusive thinking. So belief in and belief that. Another thing that's important is that there are many, it's possible to have many contradicting beliefs at the same time. And this is something that still messes with my head. But humans are inconsistent. As a teacher, you are going to have beliefs that contradict each other. And I am going through this, even as I continue to teach, that I'm still working out, right, these two beliefs that I have contradict each other. I need to do something with that. I need to work that out. And then the last one is salience. Salience is the belief we are acting on in any given situation. So with the story earlier of being in the classroom and having that action of kicking the kid out, I might have the belief that I want to be inclusive, and I might also have the belief that my class will run better if people follow the rules or the troublemakers are kicked out. Salience is whichever belief I'm acting on at the time. If a kid's calling out and I try to find a way to keep them in the classroom but still control the classroom, then I am acting on that belief of inclusion. If I choose to kick them out of the class, then I'm acting on another belief that I have on making the classroom move smoothly. And so salience is about what belief do you have at the time? Which belief are you acting on at the time? So I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to do a video on this idea of limiting beliefs.
Our beliefs have a very powerful impact on our lives. They create opportunities and they lead us through the journey that we call life. Unfortunately, not all the beliefs you have will move you in a positive direction. There are many limiting beliefs that can inhibit a person's progress. These beliefs offer a limited view of what that person can do and how far they can go in life. If you let these limiting beliefs control your path, you will have a very hard time getting to the destination that you want and seeing the success that you can achieve. In order to break through these limiting beliefs, you have to understand what they are. Ask yourself throughout this video, how many times have you let a limiting belief like these hold you back? In the Psychology of Beliefs course that I just recently finished creating, I talk a little bit further about how these beliefs are formed and how you can break them and create more positive beliefs that will aid rather than inhibit your journey. But for now, let's just identify these beliefs. Number 1, X is a bad person. People do good things and bad things, but it would be very foolish to write off a person simply as completely bad or completely good. Even bad decisions may have good intentions. The next time you catch yourself labeling someone as a bad person, take a step back. What could have caused their bad decision? How can you step in their shoes and see things that influence their decision? Also, don't forget that this limiting belief goes both ways. Labeling someone as a perfect person is very dangerous. Everyone is human and everyone makes bad decisions. If you expect one person to become perfect, you may be setting some unrealistic expectations either for yourself or for others. Number 2, they can't do something because they're something. Let's stick to the idea of labels. Labels, whether it be labels relating to race or sex or occupation, can be very limiting. They put people in boxes and place expectations on them. The cool thing is, though, that people have defied expectations and broken through labels all throughout history. So don't let yourself be the person who everyone has to prove is wrong. Number 3, I can't. You don't have to justify the doubts that you have for yourself or someone else. Just saying you don't have the ability to do something is limiting. This belief can stop you from moving any further, or especially trying. Instead of accepting this limiting belief, you may have to redefine the thing that you can't do. Before the Wright brothers, humans couldn't fly. But the Wright brothers redefined the definition of what it meant to fly, and now millions of people fly through the air every day. Number 4, it's not up to me, so it's not worth the effort. In the Psychology of Beliefs program, we talk about the theory of learned helplessness. In short, this theory says that when people believe a situation is out of their control, they just stop trying to change it. They feel helpless even when they aren't. This is a horrible limiting belief that billions of people have. Number 5, they are X more than me. There are some things we cannot control. We cannot change someone's height, the awards that they have won, or the promotions that they have received at work. But we can control how we look at other people, their successes, and their traits. Do you find yourself often comparing yourself to others? We all do, but this is a seriously limiting belief. Everyone is different. Some people are born with red hair, and some people are born with a different type of intelligence. But just like you cannot label someone as entirely good or entirely bad, you also cannot label yourself as better or worse. It's not that cut and dry. Number 6, people will judge me. This fear holds so many people back from sharing themselves or trying to achieve a goal. They worry that people will judge them. They worry that people may say something negative or talk behind their back. While this fear is legitimate, it needs to be tackled in order to move forward with all of your might. Take some time to ask yourself why the opinions of others makes a difference to you. Is there a way that you can reshape this influence and use it as fuel to move past the fear? In my past experience with fear, the best cure to it seems to be any form of action. Number 7, if I'm vulnerable, I'll only get hurt. Setting goals for yourself requires some vulnerability. This limiting belief often keeps us from getting close to another person or even falling in love. But in reality, this fear of getting hurt can affect our performance at work, following creative pursuits, or working towards other goals. Number 8, I don't deserve this. Not all limiting beliefs are built by fear. Guilt can also create a lot of limiting beliefs. You may feel guilty about moving forward in your life because you feel that you have not worked for the things that you want, or that someone else deserves it more than you. You may look at people who are less fortunate or more limited than you. This belief is closely tied to beliefs that are built out of comparing yourself to others. Everyone is given a different journey in life, and they are more than capable of moving through that journey themselves. How can you focus on your journey and your journey alone? Number 9, I should be doing X instead. Our culture has given us a list of priorities that we should have and an ideal roadmap for our future. Sometimes, following your dreams requires breaking the mold and going against the things that society tells you to do. As you start to struggle, however, you might start to feel guilty for taking a different path. This will limit you because it creates stress and guilt that may inhibit your own progress. And lastly is number 10, I don't need this. Limiting beliefs don't always hold you back. Sometimes they keep you exactly where you are. You may look at growth as unnecessary, and you might not even think it. What would you do with that extra money or title anyways? You're not a greedy person. Well, this satisfaction may keep you content for a short period of time, but before long, you might find yourself with a different attitude. After all, us as humans are goal-pursuing machines. We need a goal and we need one often. We find happiness in pursuing goals. Think about what you want beyond the things that you have right now. Even things that seem impossible can be achieved by erasing this simple, limiting belief. As I end this video, I want to let you know if you want to check out the full psychology of beliefs to learn more about how beliefs are formed, how you can pluck limiting beliefs from your mind, and to understand the system that I've found to simply change the way that you think of yourself, I'm actually offering a launch deal on it right now. You can enroll for less than $20 with the link in the description below. Thank you guys so much for watching this, and I hope that you learned something.
Yeah, so there's quite a few things that were good in that video, and I just want to pick up on two of them. One is, these two things are really crucial for teachers, because the thing about beliefs is that as an inclusive educator, as you're going through the stress of having students that are difficult and doing all the paperwork and getting through all the resources that you don't have, it is really important to be intentional about keeping your beliefs in check. What do you actually believe? What do you actually think? What do you value? And actually holding on to that. Because when you're stressed, it can be hard to keep on to it. One that I found a lot of teachers have done is this number one, person X is a bad person, or this child is a bad person. In our behaviour management system that we're going to learn about later on called CPS, there's a saying that says students do well when they can. And the idea behind that is that there's no such thing really as a student trying to be bad. Most students want to be good and they want to succeed. Most people don't want to fail. Most people want to pass. And the reality is that our students with disabilities often just don't have the skills that they need. They haven't learnt the skills that they need to be able to pass, to be able to be good, to be able to do the right thing, to be able to live out their values. So I think I really want to encourage you with this idea. Students do well when they can. When we've given them the skills to do well, they will do well. Another one that I think is extremely limiting is labels. Sometimes we have to be careful about using labels like disabilities on students. And I said this earlier, thinking this person can't do this because they're autistic. The reality is that each child is unique, and working with the child, we need to work with the child, not with the disability. Sometimes I've met some teachers who, if they've got a student with a disability in their class, they make the decision in the first week not to read any information on that child because they want to get to know the child first before they get to know the disability. And that works for some people, and that might be wise depending on your strategy of how you teach. So I'm going to finish up with how to develop better beliefs. I don't want this lecture to go too long, so if you wanted to look at this video in the Prezi link, you can have a look at it there. But I just want to point out this idea of what is your bridge to being more inclusive. Are you going to use your faith to be more inclusive? Are you going to use what you know about rights to be more inclusive? Are you going to use your compassion to be inclusive, or your morality? What is it on this bridge? Is it something that's not there? Are you thinking in terms of practicality? If I give this student a good education, then they're going to make society better. What is your motivation that's going to help you be inclusive when things get hard? What is your motivation to be a good teacher and to give a quality education when things in the classroom get hard? Is something that you need to think about as a teacher. Another thing that you need to think about is, where are you on the level of being able to change your attitude? Are you still in a place where you don't know anything about the disability? Or are you at a place where you're comfortable to care for a person with a disability? Or are you at the stage where you're ready to work with a person with disability? So start thinking about where you are on this list. What do you need to work on? Do you need to increase your knowledge? Do you need to increase your skills? Do you need to increase your experience so that you are better with people with disabilities, working with people with disabilities? Then the last thing here for improving your attitudes is, what are your thoughts? The classic model of CBT, of counselling, is that your thoughts impact how you feel. If you're thinking this student is going to be a disruption, then you're probably going to feel anxious. And then your feeling impacts how you act. If you're feeling anxious, then you're going to come in front of the classroom, and you're not going to be, you're probably going to display feelings of anxiety, and you're going to be doing things that make you look uncomfortable in the class. So you need to think about, what sort of thoughts do you need to be thinking? What sort of beliefs do you need to gravitate to? What sort of beliefs do you need to kind of have time to think about, to explore, and to come to a decision about? This video is really good. It's the power of thought, but I don't want to talk way too long. So I'll just go past that. Then when it comes to developing stronger beliefs, I really encourage you to think about this idea of the explicit beliefs versus the implicit beliefs. What are you thinking directly? What have you thought through? But then what's coming out through your actions is really important to think about. Then the next one is, believing in. Are you believing in inclusive education? Or are you believing that inclusion education? Have you thought about, right at the beginning, we talked about this idea of 4 different beliefs of inclusion. Where are you on this? Do you have a belief system of inclusion that helps you move forward, that is something you can actually believe in and trust? Do you have an idea of inclusion that you can trust? This is the Bible verse that I had earlier, that I referenced earlier, that I probably completely misquoted. It says, "You believe that there is one God. Good. Even the demons believe that and shudder." So just because you believe that God exists, does not mean that you have a trusting relationship with God. Just because you believe that there is a God doesn't mean that you've got something that helps you on a daily basis to live your everyday life. And it's the same with inclusive education. Then the last thing was about basic beliefs and salient beliefs. So I don't think I mentioned basic beliefs earlier. Salient beliefs is about what you believe in the moment. Basic beliefs is the opposite of that. It's what is your core beliefs. What do you actually value? So I hope that this lecture has really challenged you to think about attitudes and beliefs, because a lot of you are probably thinking about, probably have ideas about already about having students with disabilities in your classroom, having students with different ethnicities, different cultures, different languages, and you probably already have beliefs about what you think is okay, what you think should happen, and what you think should not happen, and what you think is not okay. But if you're going to be effective, then you need to really dig down into what your beliefs are and what your values are, because when you get into the classroom, it's not going to be easy. It's not an easy road. But if you want to be effective, now is a great time to really think about what is your beliefs. What are your attitudes? Because if you walk into a classroom knowing what your attitude is, knowing what your belief is, and knowing what you're going to do when you approach a student with a disability, that is the biggest thing that will change your effectiveness. If you know what you believe and you know what you're thinking, that is going to significantly change how effective you are as a teacher. So I really pray that you are able to spend some time doing that, and I encourage you to do that. In the next lecture, I'm actually going to open up about my disability and my experience with disability, because the research says that if you know people with disabilities and you experience that, it actually improves your attitude and helps you connect better, and makes you more effective as a teacher if you understand what different people's experiences are. So in the next lecture, I'm actually going to share my story with disability, and I'm hoping that it's going to be a little bit less intellectual, and I'm hoping that really helps you to kind of get your head in the space of what you believe, and maybe gives you a bit of encouragement as what you can do and the impact that inclusion can really have on a person and how it can really positively change a person's life. Because the other side of it is that inclusion can be such a tool for change and inspiration that just completely changes a student's life for the good. So I pray that you guys have time to think about that and to think about what you believe. Talk to us on the forum. So I hope that everything's going well. See you in the next lecture.